In a detention facility in Abuja, a man has spent over 3 years waiting, not for freedom, not for conviction, but for something in between. His case has divided a nation, sparked international debates, and raised fundamental questions about justice, sovereignty, and the rule of law. September 26, 2025, a courtroom in Abuja. The judge delivers a ruling that keeps the wheel of justice turning but brings Nigeria no closer to closure. You have a case to answer, the court declares, and so the trial continues. This is the story of Nnamdi Kanu, and a trial that seems to have no end. But the real question is not about one man. The real question is, what does this case reveal about Nigeria's justice system? And where do we draw the line between national security and constitutional rights? To understand this unending trial, we must first understand the man at its center. Nnamdi Kanu is the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, commonly known as IPOB. Born in Abia State, Kanu became the face of a renewed agitation for Biafran independence, a cause that traces its roots to Nigeria's painful civil war between 1967 and 1970. Through his radio broadcast on Radio Biafra, Kanu mobilized millions of followers in Nigeria's southeast and diaspora communities worldwide. His rhetoric was fiery, his demands uncompromising, the creation of an independent Biafra state carved from Nigeria's southeast region. To his supporters, he is a freedom fighter championing self-determination. To the Nigerian government, he represents a threat to national unity and security. But how did the radio broadcaster become one of Nigeria's most controversial figures, and why has his trial lasted so long? Kanu's legal battles began in October 2015 when he was arrested upon arrival in Nigeria and charged with treasonable felony and other offenses. He spent nearly 2 years in detention before being granted bail in April 2017. Under strict conditions, he was required to remain in Nigeria, avoid crowds, and refrain from granting media interviews. Then came September 2017. Nigerian security forces raided Kanu's home in Abia State in what the government described as a security operation. Kanu supporters called it an invasion. In the chaos that followed, Kanu disappeared from Nigeria entirely. For nearly 4 years, his whereabouts remained unknown to the public. The Nigerian government continued its trial in absentia, but many legal experts questioned the validity of these proceedings. On June 29, 2021, Nigeria's Attorney General announced that Nnamdi Kanu has been rearrested and brought back to Nigeria. However, the circumstances of this arrest immediately sparked controversy. It later emerged that Kanu had been living in Kenya, where he was reportedly arrested by Kenyan authorities and handed over to Nigerian agents without following proper extradition procedures. This is where the legal complexities began to multiply. Kenya denied involvement, but evidence suggested otherwise. Kanu's lawyer argued that his return to Nigeria violated international law, specifically the principle of extradition treaties and human rights conventions. The term that kept appearing in legal submission was extraordinary rendition, essentially, bringing someone across international borders without due process. According to constitutional law, when an accused person's rights are violated in the process of arrest, it can taint the entire prosecution. This became the central pillar of Kanu's defense strategy. In October 2022, the Nigerian Court of Appeal delivered a landmark judgment. The court ruled that Kanu's extraordinary redemption was illegal and violated his fundamental rights. The appellate court discharged him and struck out the terrorism charges against him. Legal commentators celebrated this as a victory for the rule of law and constitutional rights. However, the story did not end there. The federal government, unsatisfied with the Court of Appeal's decision, took the matter to the Supreme Court. In December 2023, Nigeria's highest court delivered a controversial ruling. The Supreme Court set aside the Court of Appeal's judgment and reinstated the criminal trial against Kanu. The Apex Court held that while the manner of Kanu's arrest was illegal, it did not strip Nigerian courts of jurisdiction to try him for alleged crimes committed on Nigerian soil. The Supreme Court decision divided legal opinion across Nigeria. Some lawyers argued that the court prioritized technicalities over fundamental human rights. Others maintained that allowing Kanu to go free would set a dangerous precedent, suggesting that violating arrest procedure could become a get-out-of-jail card for accused person. So what exactly is Nnamdi Kanu being charged for? The charges include terrorism, treasonable felony, and operating an unlawful organization. The prosecution alleges that Kanu's broadcast and action incited violence, threatened national security, and promoted the disintegration of Nigeria. The federal government maintains that evidence presented shows Kanu's broadcast contained insightful content that led to violence, attacks on security personnel, and the paralysis of economic activities in the southeast through enforcement of sit-at-home orders. However, Kanu's defense team had consistently argued that the evidence presented is insufficient and that his broadcast constituted political speech protected under Nigeria's constitution and international human rights law. After the prosecution closed its case with 5 witnesses, Kanu's defense team filed what is known as no case submission. This is a strategic move where the defense argues that the prosecution has not established a prima facie case strong enough to warrant the defendant presenting a defense. On September 26, 2025, Justice James Omotosho of the Federal High Court delivered a crucial ruling. The judge dismissed Kanu's no-case submission and held that a prima facie case of engaging in terrorism activities have been established against him. Justice Omotosho stated that the evidence presented by the prosecution's 5 witnesses was sufficient to require Kanu to provide explanations or mount a defense to the allegations. According to the court, it will be in Kanu's best interest to have the opportunity to clear the issues raised against him. The ruling means that the trial must continue. Kanu will now be required to mount a defense and present his own evidence. However, it's crucial to understand that this ruling is not a pronouncement of guilt. It simply means the court believes there are questions for Kanu to answer. The implication of this judgment are significant. It extends what is already one of Nigeria's longest running and most politically sensitive trials. It also means that Kanu's detention continues indefinitely until the trial concludes and all appeals are exhausted. The Kanu case has generated diverse opinions across Nigerian political, legal, and social spectrum. The federal government maintains that Kanu is facing legitimate criminal charges that threaten Nigeria's territorial integrity. Officials argue that self-determination agitation, when it involves incitement of violence and threat to national security, crosses the line from free speech to criminality. They point to incidents of violence in the southeast, attacks on security personnel, and enforcement of sit-at-home orders that have paralyzed economic activity as evidence of IPOB's dangerous influence. What is the defense perspective? Kanu's legal team argues that his trial is fundamentally flawed from its inception. They contend that his illegal rendition has irreparably tainted the proceedings. Furthermore, they argue that his broadcasts constitute political speech protected under the Nigerian constitution. They emphasize that Kanu has never personally engaged in violence and should not be held responsible for actions by individuals claiming affiliations with IPOB. What about the human rights organizations? Both local and international human rights groups have expressed concerns about the prolonged detention without trial, the circumstances of Kanu's rendition, and the broader implications for freedom of expression in Nigeria. Some organizations have called for a political solution rather than a purely judicial one. In Nigeria's southeast region, opinions are divided. Many Igbo people view Kanu as a hero standing up for their rights and demanding fair treatment within the Nigerian Federation. They point to marginalization, infrastructure deficit, and what they perceive as a systemic discrimination. However, others in the same region blame Kanu and IPOB for the insecurity and economic hardship caused by enforced at-home orders and violence. Constitutional scholars have raised important questions. Does the illegal manner of Kanu's arrest vitiate the trial? Can courts conveniently separate procedural violations from substantive justice? What precedent does this case set for future arrests and prosecutions? These actions remain hotly debated in legal circles. At the heart of this matter lies Nigeria's constitution, the supreme law of the land. Several constitutional provisions are directly relevant to Kanu's case. Section 35 guarantees every Nigerian the right to personal liberty and prohibits arbitrary detention. It also mandates that any arrested person must be brought before a court within a reasonable time. After more than 3 years in detention, with the trial still ongoing, questions arise about what constitutes reasonable time. Section 36 guarantees the right to fair hearing within a reasonable time by an impartial court or tribunal. This provision is fundamental to Nigeria's justice system and cannot be compromised regardless of the nature of allegations against any accused person. It includes the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Section 39 protects freedom of expression and the press. This is particularly relevant to Kanu's case as much as the prosecution evidence centers on his broadcasts and statements. The critical question is, where is the line between protected political speech and criminal incitement? Furthermore, Nigeria is a signatory to the international human rights treaties that prohibit extraordinary rendition and require due process in cross-border arrests. When domestic law conflicts with international obligations, constitutional courts have a duty to harmonize both or determine which takes precedence. The Constitution also addresses territorial integrity in Section 2, which defines Nigeria as one indivisible foreign nation. This provision is often cited by those who argue that secessionist agitation contradicts constitutional order. Tension in Kanu's case emerges from the collision between individual rights guaranteed by the Constitution and the government's duty to protect national security and territorial integrity, both constitutional obligations. Beyond Nnamdi Kanu as an individual, this case has profound implications for Nigeria as a nation. First, it tests the strength and independence of Nigeria's judiciary. Can the court balance national security concerns with constitutional rights? Would they resist political pressure and decide cases strictly on legal merits? Secondly, it highlights the unresolved national question in Nigeria. The Biafran agitation did not begin with Kanu, nor will it end with him. Millions of Nigerians in the southeast feel marginalized, underrepresented, and economically disadvantaged. Unless these legitimate grievances are addressed through inclusive governance and equitable resource distribution, the cycle of agitation will continue. Third, this case demonstrates the limits of purely judicial solutions to political problems. Many commentators have suggested that while Kanu faces legitimate legal questions, his continued detention without resolution fares rather than dampen secessionist sentiment. A political solution that addresses root causes might prove more effective than prolonged prosecution. Fourth, the case has international dimensions. Nigeria's handling of this matter is being watched by human rights organizations globally. It affects Nigeria's international reputation and its commitment to rule of law and human rights. As this documentary concludes, Nnamdi Kanu remains in DSS custody. His trial continues under Justice Omotosho and the defense phase beginning soon. Legal observers expect this phase to last months, possibly years, with inevitable appeals following an eventual verdict. Several scenarios could unfold. The court could ultimately convict Kanu, acquit him, or the government could seek a political settlement. Each outcome carries its own consequence for Nigeria's stability, unity, and commitment to constitutional governance. What remains clear is that this case has transcended one man's trial. It has become a mirror reflecting Nigeria's deepest challenges: ethnic tensions, governance failures, judicial independence, and the ongoing struggle to build a truly united and equitable nation. The trial of Nnamdi Kanu is unending, not simply because of legal complexities, but because it embodies unresolved contradictions in Nigeria's national project. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, unity, and the rights of citizens within a diverse federation. The Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria must remain our guide. It guarantees both national unity and individual rights, both security and freedom. The challenge is applying these principles fairly, consistently, and without political bias. Whether you view Kanu as a freedom fighter or a threat to national security, his right to fair trial within reasonable time is non-negotiable. Whether you support Biafran agitation or Nigerian unity, addressing legitimate grievances through dialogue remains essential for lasting peace. As the trial continues, one thing is certain: Nigerian justice system, its commitment to constitutional rule, and the ability to manage diversity are all on trial alongside Nnamdi Kanu. The judgment that truly matters may not come from any courtroom, but from history's assessment of how we navigated these moments. The unending trial continues, the questions remain, and Nigeria must find its answers. Till I come your way again, see you soon.